Martin Luther King Jr. Table of Contents. Introduction 4. Growing up in the South 5. Starting his work 11. Marches and Struggles 15. I Have a Dream 18. One Last March 22. Glossary 24. Introduction. On the third Monday in January, Americans celebrate Martin Luther King Day. We honor a great African American leader who worked for freedom for all people. Who was this man? Who has a national holiday in his name? A girl marches in a Martin Luther King parade. In the South, African Americans had always lived under laws that were unfair to them. Before the Civil War, most blacks had been slaves to white owners. During this war, President Abraham Lincoln granted freedom to slaves by passing a special law. But even though black people were freed from slavery, Southern lawmakers passed new laws to keep them separated or segregated from white people. Abraham Lincoln. As Martin grew up, he learned from his parents and his teachers that the laws calling for segregation were unfair. African Americans were suffering from not having equal rights. Many of them were poor and could not find jobs. Martin wanted to help African American people gain full freedom and civil rights. A poor family in their Washington, D.C. apartment. While he was up north, Martin met his future wife, Coretta Scott. She was studying to become a singer. On their first date, Martin told Coretta he wanted to marry her. He liked her for her beliefs and her commitment to equality, as well as her beauty. In the summer of 1953, they got married. A year later, Martin took his first preaching job at a Baptist church in Montgomery, Alabama. This photo of Rev. Martin Luther Jr. King and his wife Coretta was taken 3 years after they married. But some white people were not happy with the Supreme Court ruling. They fought integrated schools. A group of white people called the Ku Klux Klan, KKK, tried to prevent blacks from having equal rights. Members of the KKK wore white robes and hoods to hide their faces. Their actions were often violent. Many other white people, while not violent, opposed integration as well. Yet many other whites around the country supported integration and full equality for blacks. Some worked along with blacks to gain civil rights. Members of the KKK burning a cross at a meeting. In December 1955, something important happened in Montgomery, where Martin and his family were living. A black woman named Rosa Parks refused to give up her seat on a bus to a white man. She was arrested. The black citizens of the city were outraged, and they decided to protest. They refused to ride city buses because they wanted an end to segregation on the buses. This kind of protest, in which people refuse to participate in something in order to force a change, is called a boycott. It is a peaceful means of protest. Rosa Parks is fingerprinted in Montgomery, Alabama. Marches and Struggles. Still, violence against African Americans continued in the South. Several churches were firebombed in Montgomery. Martin spoke out saying, "We will not hate you, but we will not obey your evil laws." Courageous blacks started to test the unfair laws of segregation. In 1960, small groups, often students, began sit-ins at lunch counters, where only white people could be served. During a sit-in, people sit somewhere and refuse to move as a form of peaceful protest. While the blacks sat in their seats, angry whites often pushed or beat them. But in time, the sit-ins were successful. By the end of the year, more than 100 southern towns had integrated their lunch counters. A 1960 sit-in at a white-only lunch counter. In April 1963, Martin led the famous Birmingham March to stop segregation in the city. The marchers were met by the police chief, Bull Connor, and his men. Attack dogs were set loose on the marchers, even on children. The marchers were sprayed with high-pressure fire hoses. Many were seriously injured. More than 3,000 African Americans were arrested and jailed. President Kennedy sent U.S. troops to Birmingham to stop the violence. Finally, the city ended its segregation laws. Television and newspaper reporters of the violence in Birmingham made more and more people aware of the unfair and unhushed treatments of African Americans. It brought more attention to the need for equal rights for all people. A group of marchers run for safety as they are sprayed with powerful fire hoses. Sadly, 3 months later, President Kennedy was assassinated, but the Civil Rights Act, which he supported and which ended segregation in all public buildings, became law in 1964. President Lyndon Johnson signs into law the Civil Rights Act. The next struggle for blacks was for voting rights. In the South, some whites made it nearly impossible for some blacks to vote. In some places, they charged a special tax many poor people could not afford. Those who failed to pay the tax were not allowed to vote. Civil rights supporters staged a peaceful demonstration for voting rights in Mississippi in 1964. One last march. In 1968, Martin planned a Poor People's Campaign. The goal was to get better homes, schools, and jobs for African Americans. That spring, he went to help out on a strike held by the garbage collectors in Memphis, Tennessee. During a strike, workers refused to work until they won better wages or working conditions. While in Memphis, Martin was killed by an assassin's bullet. He died on April 4, 1968, at the age of 39. Martin Luther King Jr. participates in a civil rights march in Memphis days before his assassination. The whole world mourned the death of this great man. Martin Luther King Jr. is remembered for making real the dream of equality. He is remembered as a man of peace and a champion of rights and freedom for people of every color. Assassinated, killed by a surprise attack. Civil rights, legal, social, and economic rights that guarantee freedom and equality for all citizens. Equality, the condition in which everyone has the same rights. Integrate, to bring different ideas or groups of people together. Nonviolent, peaceful. Protest, to act in a way that expresses strong disagreement or disapproval. Race, a group of humans as defined by skin color and features or by genetics. Segregated, kept apart on the basis of group differences, especially race.